This
turn more
conference will
into,
now be recorded.
okay, it's going to be recorded. So I'd like people to participate and speak up as we discuss different things about the weekly Torah reading of this week, the double Parsha. Actually, it's a double Parsha this week. The reason why we have a double Parsha, we read two Parshas sometimes, is that we finish the entire Torah every year by Simchat Torah, by the end of the Sukkot holiday. And being that the Hebrew year is somewhat of a fluid year, in terms of some years we need to add on an extra month in order to make sure that our 354-day lunar year stays in sync with the seasons of the 365-day solar year. So 7 out of every 19 years, we add on an added month, Adar Bet, second month of Adar. That keeps us in sync. Just very quick math for those who are interested in the math. 354, 365, we're 11 days short. 11 times 19, right? So 11 times 20 be 220, comes out to 209. 7 times 30, 210. Basically, 7 out of every 19 years, we stay in sync. Also, if a holiday falls out on Shabbos, we don't have a regular Torah reading. So that's how we keep it going over there. So far, the only one who's not muted is Kathy. Anyone else wants to non-mute, please do non-mute. Let us know that you're here, and then please feel free to speak up. Otherwise, it's going to be Kathy and I speaking up this morning. Okay, so those of you who have a Chumash in front of you, and if you've got the, I'm going to be using what you normally use in class, which is the Art Scroll Stone edition. So if you have that, turn to page 516. If you have for Parshat Vayakhel, and if you have a regular Chumash, it's Parshat Vayakhel, chapter 35, verse 1. If you don't have a Chumash, then you don't need one. You'll just listen to us, and you'll hear what we're talking about, and you can join in with us. So Parshat Vayakhel begins, Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisroel. Moshe gathered the entire assembly of b'nei Yisrael and said to them, these are the things that Hashem has commanded. And we first speak about Shabbat, the Sabbath, and then 4 verses in, we go right into the actual building of the Mishkan. The Mishkan was the sanctuary, it's called. The Mishkan, the tabernacle, that was this mobile sanctuary, which eventually became incorporated into the temple by King Solomon Shlomo Melech in Yerushalayim. But this had the ark, and it had the menorah, and it had a shulchan, and a table upon which there were these special breads that were put on, and it had the altars, and all of the service was done there in this Mishkan. And these next two parshiot bring us to the end of the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. So that is all about the actual construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. What's somewhat strange is we had two parshiot going back. We had Truma and Tetzaveh, which dealt with the instructions of how to build this Mishkan. Then we had Parsha Kititza last week, which had the Chet Egel, the sin of the golden calf. And now the last two Parshiot, the completion of Shemot, is the actual construction of the Mishkan, and we'll see the last few verses of what happened upon the completion of the Mishkan. What I wanted to point out is something that Rabbi Sachs points out. We begin Vayakhel Moshe, and Moshe gathered the entire congregation. And then we find back on page 494, of those who have the Stone Chumash, 495, there when the people are starting to panic because Moshe has not come down from Mount Sinai on the day that they miscalculated and thought that was the day that Moshe should be coming down. When he did not come down on that day, they panicked. Vayikahel ha'am al Aharon. And the nation Vayikahel, they gathered by Aharon. So we have Vayakhel, Kahal, which means congregation or to congregate. We have Moshe congregating, Vayakhel, assembling the congregation. And we also have Vayikahel, the people gathering by Aharon. Now, these were two completely different gatherings, yet the Torah specifically uses the same word for them to let us know that there is a commonality here. However, it is one that could go off in very, very different directions. So what would be, let me hear some ideas out there from some of you who are not muted. Let me hear some ideas out there about what this might be, this gathering. What have we seen in our days about gatherings? And why did these two gatherings go off in such opposite directions? Is there anybody out there? Some ideas.
Oh.
So certainly there's a power in a group. That we know. What are the negative powers in groups?
You can get a mob mentality.
Mob mentality. Yes, mob mentality. When is there a mob mentality? When does that happen?
Fear.
I'm sorry?
When people are frightened or angry.
Okay. When people are frightened or people are angry, right? So then we have this mob mentality. And that is when people do things in a group that they would never do on their own. That's the mob mentality. When things go out of control and you're just being dragged along by everyone else who's doing what they're doing and you just join in with them and do it also. And often horrible things are done that as an individual, I wouldn't do that. But as part of the mob, I do that. And Vayakhel, when they gathered by Aaron, they were in a frenzy. They were in a panic. They viewed Moshe, they depended on Moshe as being the link between them and the heavens, between them and God. And all of a sudden, they lost their reception. Their cell phone is dead. There's no way that they can make that connection anymore. And they feel, hey, we're in the middle of a wilderness, middle of a desert over here. And we've lost the conduit that we have between us and God. And therefore, we need to do something. Right? Now, actually, it's devolved, as often happens with a mob, but at least it started off with a mob mentality that was misguided, but they did go to Aaron. And Aaron was the number 2 man at that point. So therefore, they were trying to create another sort of a link between them and God. And they went to Aaron, and actually there are those that explained that this Egel, this golden calf, was meant to be something upon which the Spirit of God would rest, and they would be able to access that and thereby connect. Does that sound familiar? Is there anything else that was built upon which the Spirit of God would rest and they would thereby be able to connect?
The Mishkan.
The Mishkan. Thank you. Who's that speaking? Is that Robin?
Yeah.
Hi, Robin.
Yes.
Good morning. Right? The Mishkan. So all of a sudden we realize, wait, this Egel was not so crazy. because the two parshiot before the Egel, before the golden calf, and the two parshiot after the golden calf, all four of them deal with the building of this Mishkan, which was a physical, for the most part, golden structure, a physical golden structure upon which God's presence would rest. So why is the Egel the most horrific sin that we ever could have done? And why is the Mishkan, which then became built into the temple, into the Beit HaMikdash, that we mourn its destruction every year, every day, and every year on Tisha B'Av? What is the difference? Why is this Egel so terrible? And why is this Mishkan so holy? And how did this Vayakhel and Vayakhel, this congregating, what's the difference between the two? Why is one so horrific? And why is the other one so holy? How has it gone off?
Well,
So, Kathy, yes, please.
The difference definitely, right, at least initially, is the Mishkan was commanded by Hashem and very detailed on how he wanted this set up and to be worshipped, where the Egel was more man-made, and they were going to come to God on their terms.
Okay. Beautiful. Someone else was saying something? I see caller one. No? Someone else was saying something? Okay.
Can I say one thing?
Yes, go on, please.
Yeah. Does anything have to do with Amunah?
What do you mean by Amunah, by faith?
Yeah, in terms of their relationship with Hashem and the willingness to build the Mishkan and follow the leadership of Moshe and what the outcome would be. Because when you were talking about, this mob scene and when things get very disrupted, you need leadership, and Moshe had the strength to do this.
Okay. So both of you are hitting on, I think, what are the two major points over here in this Vayakhel and Vayakhel, and the difference that we have over here. In the case of the Egel, in the case of the golden calf, they were a mob, as Kathy had said. They were in a frenzy. They were in a panic. And they were not they came to Aaron, but they were not really looking for that much guidance. They were telling Aaron what should do. Vayomru elav. I'm back on page 494, Parsha Kitisa, in the Art Scroll, Perek Lamed Bet, chapter 32, verse 1. They said, the nation saw ki voshesh Moshe l'red min har, that Moshe was late in coming down from the mountain, again, according to their miscalculation. Vayikahel ha'am al Aharon. And the congregation and the nation gathered al Aharon. Normally there's al and there's el. Al means on, el means to. So right away we get a sense from the text over here of what was their approach. It wasn't El, it wasn't to Aharon, it was Al Aharon. It was on Aharon. Vayomru elav, and they said to him, Kum ase lanu Elohim. Kum, get up. Ase lanu Elohim, and make for us this intermediary God, as many of the commentators explain it. Asher yelchu lefanenu, who will go before us, kizeh Moshe ish, because Moshe, the man who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to them. So clearly they're coming to Aaron, but they're not coming to Aaron as a leader. Give us some guidance. Let us know what we should do. We're frightened. We feel lost. We feel disconnected. They came, they gathered on Aaron, and they told him, Kum, get up, Ase lanu Elokim. There's another place where we find that word kum, get up, and we view that as a disrespectful way of addressing, and we lambast the one who used that term. Anybody remember where that might be? So when Yaakov and Esav are coming to Yitzchak, when Jacob and Esav are coming to Isaac in order to receive the brachot, the blessings, so Esav speaks in a very coarse, kum, Avi, get up, my father. Whereas Yaakov says, please get up, my father. So kum, we saw already before, our ears are attuned to that this is a very harsh way of approaching someone. That's how they approached Aharon. Get up, do this for us. We're coming to the leader, but you're not a leader. You're not a leader. We're telling you what to do. The Talmud, the Gemara says that before the coming of the Mashiach, of the Messiah, Pnei Hador ke Pnei HaKelev, the face of a generation is like that of a dog. What does that mean? And the Pnei means the leaders will be like that, like a dog. What does that mean? So commentators explain a dog is walking in front of the one who's walking the dog. So someone who doesn't really understand the situation would think, oh, the dog is leading. But what does the dog keep doing? Keeps looking back to see where he should be going. So he's in front, but he's not in front. He's appears to be leading, but he's actually being led by those behind. And so too the sages, the Talmud tells us that before the Mashiach, the leaders will not be true leaders. They'll always be looking back at the polls to see what do the people want, and that's what I will do. Right? Abraham Lincoln didn't take a poll about emancipation of the slaves. He understood this was the right thing to do. I'm the leader. This is where I must lead the people to, as opposed to being led to from behind. They were not looking for a leader. They were looking for someone who would do their bidding. And if you're not going to do their bidding, then they'll find someone else. Actually, there was someone else who didn't do their bidding. Who was that? And it didn't end up very well for him. So that was, interestingly enough, when the Torah discusses here in Vayakhel, when the Torah discusses who is going to be the one who's going to be the chief artisan, so normally the Torah mentions a person's name and the name of his father. If you look on page 520 in Vayakhel, and again, that's chapter 35, verse 30. Here is where we find who the chief artisan is going to be. Who is that chief artisan? And Moshe said to Bnei Yisroel, Re'u, see, Kara Hashem, God has called out B'Shem, by name, the person who's going to be this chief artisan. Who is that? Bitzalel, Ben, the son of Uri, Ben Chor, the son of Chor, Lemate Yehuda, to the tribe of Yehuda. Who was Chor? Again, the Torah normally doesn't mention the name of the grandfather, just the father. Here we hear his grandfather. Who was the grandfather? Who was Chor? Don't be bashful. I know I can't see any of you. Tell you, a men's class, I think more of the videos would be open. Women's class at 9 o'clock in the morning, no videos. Who was Chor? So Chor, I'm sorry? Ani lo yadat. Okay, fair enough. Chor was the son of Miriam. Right? Chor was the son of Miriam. And what happened with Chor? When this whole Egel scene is unfolding, Chor tried to stand in the way. Chor wanted to prevent them. What happened to Chor? He was killed. He was killed by the mob. Actually, it says there that Aaron, if you want to look back on page 494 Vayar Aaron, verse 5 there, chapter 32, this is when they all gathered on him. Aaron saw Vayiven Mizbeach, and he built an altar. Rashi brings, and very, very important, in the Torah itself, we know there are no nekudot, there are no dots. Why? Because the dots, the nekudot, the vowelization of the words limit us to one level of understanding. And that's the very simple pshat, simple explanation with which how we read the Torah. And if the Baal Koreh reads it incorrectly, we will correct him. The Torah reader reads it, we will correct him. But there are many other levels that are not, that are contained in the words without the vowelization, using other vowelization. Actually, Ramban, Nachmanides, in his introduction to the Torah, says that the primordial Torah didn't even have breaks between the words. It was a string of letters, because once again, once you're breaking it down, as we break it down, it limits it to one understanding. But there are many, many other levels of understanding. Vayiven Mizbeach, as we pronounce it, means, and he built Mizbeach, an altar. But another way of vowelizing those words is Vayiven, and he understood Mizevach, from the one who was slaughtered. Who's the one who was slaughtered? Chor. Aaron understood that if he wanted to stop them, then standing in their way would not work. Standing in their way, they would kill him, and that would just add to this tremendous sin that was unfolding. And therefore, Aaron instead said, as that pasuk continues, Chag LaHashem Machar. Let's do it tomorrow. Confident that by the next day Moshe would come down, and the Chag, the celebration, Lamachar, Machar, the next day, would be LaHashem. It would actually be for God, because things would be righted at that point. So the one who lost his life in order to try to prevent this Egel is the one whose grandson is the artisan, is the builder of the Mishkan. So once again, we see this intimate connection between Egel, the golden calf, Mishkan, sanctuary, tabernacle. It was the same idea. One had gone awry and the other one was focused. And so far we've heard the differences that you've brought up. Differences being, is it being done in a craze, in a frenzy? Because whenever we are in such a state, the decisions that we make are usually the decisions that we make in such a state are not sound, are not based, and will often regret it afterwards, as opposed to being in a settled, miyushav, clear state of mind. And they were not looking for leadership over there. They wanted to do it their way. They were not looking for leadership, as opposed to Vayakhel, where Moshe gathered the people. And also they were trying to create what we call their own spirituality. We're going to decide how we're going to connect to God.
Rabbi
And
Ciner,
that is, yes.
is it also possible that they tried to create a pause, like a pause, in other words, that they could rethink a situation?
At which point, Karen? By the
Forming-
Egel, you mean by the golden calf?
Yes.
So Aaron was trying to hit that pause button.
Okay.
But they were in this mob mentality of "Kum, get up, let's do this," right? Not let's do this, you do this for us. So you're right, Karen. The pause would have been the perfect thing to do. That's what Aaron tried to do, but they were in the frenzy.
Okay.
And when we're in a state of frenzy, that is when decisions are made that invariably we look back on those decisions and we say, what was I thinking? And yeah, we see a lot of this frenzy and this mob mentality today with what's going on in here in our vastly altered world. It's incredible. Purim was last week. Can you
Right.
believe Purim was a week ago? It feels like it was.
Centuries.
Months ago. Yeah, things have changed. And last week we were giving out mishloach manot, and then after that we're fighting over toilet paper, right? Getting into fistfights in Costco and in Ralph's and in Albertsons, right? It's this frenzy. It's this frenzy that doesn't allow for us to take a deep breath. The Gemara, the Talmud compares a person being angry to a person who is drunk. And many comparisons are drawn, but when I'm drunk, I act in a way that I think makes sense. Actually, I think I'm very, very wise and profound and insightful, but actually I'm not processing properly. And the things that I say, the decisions that I make are usually very, very ill-conceived. When a person is angry also, or in a frenzy also, things are happening too fast. Things are happening too fast for our minds to really sort things out properly. So that was the Vayakhel. But also, as I mentioned a moment ago, a difference is, am I creating my spirituality, or is God letting me know what should be done? We have the Egel, right? The terrible, terrible sin of the golden calf, and we have the holiness of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. So over there, we're a mob, we're a frenzy, and we are truly leaderless. And Rabbi Sachs, in his beautiful article, mentions the Arab Spring, which was a mob that wanted to change things, but they didn't have leadership. And therefore, out of what was called the Arab Spring came the Arab Winter. I think Tunisia is the only country out of all of those countries which had their whole uprising, which changed the basis of government into a more representative democratic manner. But this mob, without having the leader, even though in that case what they were doing was essentially a good thing, but without the proper leadership, it doesn't go. Here it's Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisroel. Moshe gathered the congregation. Not that they gathered on Aaron or on Moshe. Moshe gathered kol adat b'nei Yisroel. Right? And what did he ask them to do? He asked them to participate in the building of this Mishkan. And it was done, we're back on page 516, verse 5. K'chu me'itechem truma laHashem. Take from amongst you a truma, a donation. Truma also means uplifting, because when we give, we are uplifted. When we give, we are dignified. When we give, we are God-like. Hashem, God, is the epitome of the giver because he needs nothing. When we give, and we feel that when we do something really giving, we feel the chills going up and down our spine. We feel that we're going beyond ourselves. We're touching something that can't really be contained within our physical bodies. We're touching that spirituality, that what's called chelek Eloka mima'al, that portion of God above that is inside of us. We touch that, we activate that, it starts to reverberate. We feel the chills and we feel, wow, this is something beyond. Teruma, donation is teruma, meromen, it uplifts. Kol nediv libo, it needs to be coming from the heart. It is a passionate, felt, thought out donation that is given. All of these different materials that were given for this Mishkan. Now, there are different views amongst the classic commentators. Some say that this Mishkan only came about after the Chet HaEgel, after the sin of the golden calf, meaning had we not had the sin of the golden calf, we would not have needed this physical structure to connect to. We would have had that connection to God without that. We didn't need this physicality. It's only because of the golden calf which brought us down to that level. In other words, we are constantly in a state of movement. Rav Dessler explains very beautifully the idea of nekudat habechira, which means the nekuda, the point of our free will. And he says, where you are right now, draw the dot. Draw a circle around that. The upper realm of that circle is how high you can go. The lower end of that circle is how low a person can go. And every decision that we make, if we make a decision of a good act, I'm going to do an act of kindness. Now I'm over there. Now I redraw the circle. That which I would have entertained doing beforehand, that's beneath me. I'll never do that. That which was, oh, that's beyond. I can never think of doing that. That's suddenly entered into the realm of the upper realm of my circle. Make a bad decision. That which I could have considered before is now beyond my circle. That which I wouldn't have considered before is now within. So we change ourselves with the decisions that we make. The nation as a whole changed as a result of that Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf. And now we were altered, we were changed, we were transformed, and now we needed this physical structure where we would have this connection to God. Others disagree. Others say, well, what do you mean? The whole Mishkan was Parsha Teruma, Parsha Tetzava, going back 3 and 4 Parshiot ago. Those were commanded before the Egel, before the sin of the golden calf. Others say, Ein Muktam Umeuchar Batorah. The Torah doesn't go on a chronological line. It's not a history book. It's Torah Chayim, Torah instructions for life. And therefore there's an order, but it's not necessarily a chronological order. And Rashi actually brings out, makes this point that unless Hashem had clearly told us to do the Mishkan after the sin of the golden calf, then Moshe would not have been able on his own to assume, yes, let's go ahead with it, because the world might have changed. But either way, after the golden calf, now we have the Mishkan. Whether we would have had it either way or only now, that the commentators disagree with. But what is fascinating, going back to a point that I think Kathy had made, is if you have your Chumash in front of you, when we go to Parshat Pekudie, the second one of the two that we're reading, we have a phrase that is so redundant, over and over and over. I'm on page 532 in Parshat Pekudie, the very start of chapter 39, verse 1, and there it says, the turquoise and the purple scarlet wool, they made all the vestments. Kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe, as God had commanded Moshe. Then we have verse 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, which speaks about further construction, and then it concludes, Kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe, as God commanded Moshe. Someone please keep a tally. Verse 6, they made the stones that went onto the garments, and they placed the stones there. Verse 7, Kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe, as God commanded Moshe. And then they made the choshen, which was the breastplate. Verse 21, as God commanded Moshe. Then they made the me'il, that garment. Verse 27, Kasher tziva, as God commanded Moshe. They made the katanot sheish, the apron-like garment. Verse 29, as God commanded Moshe. They made the tzitz. Get the idea? They made that forehead plate as God commanded Moshe. And they finished all that God commanded. That's how they did it. And I probably missed a few. Why does it keep repeating over and over, as God commanded Moshe, as God commanded Moshe? Say at the end, they did everything like God commanded Moses. Why does it say it over and over and over and over and over? Why?
To drive the point through.
Mhm.
Which point, Karen?
That
Which point? That we can't create our own spirituality. How is this different than the Egel? How is this different than the golden calf? The difference is Kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe. Because this was a command, and therefore, if I want to draw close to God, right? If I want to build a relationship, right? So there's an excellent book about the 5 love languages, something like that. The 5 love languages, right? So different people feel loved in different ways, right? And every person has their own love language, and sometimes their spouse has the same or a different love language. And a person needs to understand what speaks to that other person. If I do what works for me, right? If I were to constantly give Natalie chocolate, that's not going to work. It works for me, but she doesn't eat chocolate. So I'm saying this is how I want to connect. So I'm going to connect that way. But unless the recipient wants to connect in that way and feels connected in that way, then there's not going to be a connection. It's not going to work.
Amen.
We want to build a relationship with God. That's what it's all about. That's Torah. Whenever I go to a school, I say to kids, what does Torah mean? They get nervous. So then I say, wow, I have to tell your parents, 12 years of yeshiva education and tuition. Wow, where's it all gone? But then I say, what does Mora mean? And in a second, everyone jumps. Oh, Mora means teacher. Mora, Torah. Mora, teacher. Torah, teachings. Teachings of what? Torat Chaim. Teachings of life. And it's an instruction, it's a manual as how physical people living in a physical world, in our physical self, how do we touch that which goes beyond the physical? How do we touch the spiritual? Actually, a mitzvah is that flashpoint where the physical person in a physical world, using physical objects, can touch and access that which is beyond the physical, can access that which is eternal. So the whole idea of everything that we do as Jews is we want to connect to God.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way to do that is making sure that we are using, so to speak, forgive me, God's love language. Right? And if I like chocolate, giving God chocolate is not going to do it if God says that's not the way to connect. And the Torah is giving us the pathways as to connect. And the Mishkan, God told Moshe, this is the way it should be constructed in order to make this that meeting point, that flash point, that place of connection. And therefore, the antithesis of the Egel was this Mishkan kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe, as God commanded Moshe, as God commanded Moshe, as God commanded Moshe. It's like this mantra that just keeps being repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated to let us know that yes, that is why this is so different than what we had before. That is why that Vayakhel, they gathered al Aaron, led to such travesty, whereas this led to the construction of that which is holiest to us. When we go to Israel, we go to Yerushalayim. We go to Yerushalayim, we go to the Kotel. But the Kotel is not the holiest place for us. The Kotel is the retaining wall behind the Temple Mount. And if you take the tunnel, tours highly recommended. When you go to the Kotel, you'll walk along that the wall. The wall that we see is a small part. Greater wall is like a little section over there. You walk along and you come to the point across from the Kodesh Kadashim, from the Holy of Holies. And all of that was based on this Mishkan that Moshe and Bezalel had built and was transported through the desert, came into the land of Israel, had different places where it was established, Nov, Givon, Shiloh, and eventually Solomon established it in Yerushalayim as the Nachala, not as the resting place, but as its proper forever place. And that is where the Bayit Shlishi, the third temple, will be rebuilt. Our holiness is based on this Mishkan, on this Mikdash, based on this Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe. By following that.
I have a question.
Please. Yes, Robin.
So, I don't know if it makes sense, but like the first 10 commandments that God had Moshe bring down, that was God commanded Moshe. But then didn't the second one, he wrote himself, God didn't write it, right? Supposedly Moshe wrote it. Was that commanded by God to go back?
No, that was also with the finger of God. It was Moshe's stones, tablets that he brought. But
Okay.
But I believe, yes, they were both the Katav of Hashem. But where do you want to go with that, Robin?
Well, just because I was just thinking like everything was Moses, God, God commanded everything. You were saying God this, and told Moses to do this and that, and I was just thinking of that Moses did it on his own. I thought kind of the second time.
No, he didn't, but he needed to take more initiative, right? Actually, they compare it like you broke the stones, you bring the new ones. Sounds like a parent, right? Right?
Okay.
You broke the stones, you bring the new ones, right? But it was still the Katav. It was still the Katav, the Etzba Elokim, we call it, the finger of Hashem.
So it wasn't really Moses writing it himself the second time.
Correct.
Never mind.
Okay. Another point that I wanted to bring out, which does connect to this and also connects to the new world that we find ourselves in, like I said, only one short week after Purim, but a greatly altered world. So Ramban, Nachmanides explains, as we said before, that the Torah is not simply a history book, and each of the, we don't have one Torah, we have Chamisha Chumshei Torah. We have 5 Chumashim. Chumash comes from the word Chamesh, which means 5 or a fifth. We have 5 books, the 5 books of Moses.
Rabbi, sorry.
Yes.
You said that it's only a week, but that week is the difference between Purim and for us is our reality. But for Israel, for instance, it's been much longer. They've been in quarantine, my parents now, for over a month,
Wow.
self-quarantine. So I'm just saying, so it's different perspectives of what.
Yes. Yes, that's very true. That's very true, Karen. Yes, yes. The only point that I was making is that I know for myself, it's amazing how life has become so altered in the course of a week, right? In the course of a week. Yes, but you're right. You're 100% right, Karen. And different people around the world have been dealing with this, right, for different amounts of time. Yeah, yeah. Our daughter was in Israel. She
Right.
she came home on Sunday. Yeah, it's been, yes, I agree. I agree.
Right.
So Ramban says that each of the books has its own story to tell, its own mission, its own theme. And the book of Bereshit, Genesis, is about the physical and spiritual creation of the world, meaning the physical creation, the very first 20 something verses, and then laying down the moral principles that we learned from Adam and Eve and the generation of Noah, and then from the patriarchs and the matriarchs, bringing us through Yosef. It's laying down the foundations. The book of Exodus, of Shmot, that he says is the book of Galut and Geula, the book of exile and redemption. And he explains that's why the book of Exodus began, and these are the names of the children of Israel who came down to Egypt. Now, 1 second. At the end of Bereshit, we already came down to Egypt. The end of Bereshit is us in Egypt. We came down to Joseph, and the brothers are there, and all that's going on, and the death of Jacob in Egypt. We're already in Egypt. So why is Shmot beginning? And these are the names of the children of Israel. Vayakhel Shmot, and these are the names, Shmot, names of those who went down to Egypt were there already. And Ramban explains because it's not a history book. So it's not, well, we already got there, let's pick up where we left off. No, this is the book of exile and redemption. As such, it must start with the very start of exile. So we reiterate, and these are the names of the children of Israel who came down to Egypt. And the end of the book is redemption. So we would think, oh, so what's the end of the book going to be? Some might say, Exodus from Egypt, right? Exile, redemption, going down to Egypt, leaving Egypt. But in fact, the Exodus from Egypt took place, Parsha B'Shalach, well back towards the middle of the book of Shmot. So that's not the redemption. Others will say, oh, it's receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai. That's exile, Egypt, redemption, not just the physical redemption of physically leaving Egypt, but the spiritual height that we attained on Mount Sinai. That's the redemption. Problem being, that's not the case, because that's not the end of the book. That's in Parshat Yitro, again towards the middle of the book. So you say, oh, it's leaving Egypt and entering Israel. But that's not at the end of Shemot. That's not even at the end of the entire Torah, at the end of Devar and Deuteronomy. That's only in the book of Joshua, the prophets. So what is the redemption that this book of exile and redemption concludes with? So if you have a stone chumash, turn to page 540. If you have a regular chumash, it's chapter Mem 40, verse 34. And if you don't have, I'll read it and you'll hear. The very last parsha, meaning the last paragraph of this book of exile and redemption is Vayichas ha'anan et Ohel Moed. The cloud covered the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, which is a reference to the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Ukavod Hashem malei HaMishkan. And the honor, the glory of God filled that Mishkan, filled that tabernacle. V'lo yachol Moshe lavo moed, and Moshe cannot enter because the cloud was there. The cloud was on it, and the glory of God was in it. Mishkan, And when the cloud would lift up from the Mishkan, the children of Israel would travel. And if the cloud would not lift up, then we would not travel ad yom he'aloto, until the day that it would go up. Because the cloud of God was on the Mishkan by day and the fire by night, le'enei kol Beit Yisroel, before the eyes of all Israel, b'chol mas'ehem, in all of their journeys. That's the end of Shmot. Chazak, chazak, v'nitchazek. As we say when we finish the entire book, let us be strengthened, be strong, strong, and be strengthened. So the final geula, the final redemption of this book of exile and redemption is this connection to God. It's God's presence being there, being tangibly felt, experienced, that we make this connection to God. And the last words are b'chol mas'ehem, throughout their journeys, which means that even though we don't have the Mishkan, the tabernacle, as we understood through the whole Purim lessons that we learned, Purim was a time where God is hidden, but he is as with us as he always was. B'chol masehem, with all of our journeys, that God is there with us. And the true geula, the true redemption, is when we have this connection to God. But keep in mind, back in Parsha Teruma, my bar mitzvah Parsha, when we spoke about the very first time we spoke about the building of this Mishkan, the pasuk there says so powerfully, "V'asu li mikdash, make for me a mikdash, make for me a sanctuary, v'shachanti, and I will dwell." It doesn't say bitocho. It doesn't say I will dwell in it. V'shachanti bitocham, I will dwell amongst you. I will dwell in you. And that's the geula. That is the redemption nationally and personally, when we make place in our hearts, in our homes, in our families, in our world, for God to dwell. And a thought that I had about the present situation, our Mishkan, our Mikdash, is in a destroyed state. But we don't feel that. You know, we go to the kotel, it's beautiful, we make bar mitzvahs there, we blow shofar, we do a dance there when we go on our momentum trips, right? Or go there on a Friday night, right? We don't really feel the loss. Our shuls are considered to be a mikdash ma'at. They're called a microcosm, a small version of the mikdash. And perhaps a thought that I had, why in the world would God be orchestrating this that allows or that forces our shuls to be closed? And I think perhaps there are two messages there. One is that we need to realize what we're missing. And if our temples, our shuls were replacing our Beit HaMikdash, so we didn't feel we're missing anything, we need to realize that we are missing that Beit HaMikdash, that temple in Jerusalem. That's on one hand. On the other hand, we have to realize B'shachanti b'tocham, that as important a role as the Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem plays, and as important a role as our temples and our shuls, our synagogues play, and we hope to soon be able to rejoin as a whole community all together. At the same time, we have to realize bitocham, that we need to utilize this time to build that temple inside of us. Is a beautiful song from Rav Hutner, one of the great Rashi yeshivas of the 20th century. Bilvavi Mishkan Evne. Bilvavi Mishkan Evne. Beautiful, beautiful song. The words are Bilvavi, in my heart, Mishkan Evne. I will build a Mishkan. I will build a sanctuary. So we have to utilize this time now to appreciate what we're missing in Jerusalem, to appreciate what we're missing in our communities and our shuls that we normally frequent, and utilize this time to bilvavi Mishkan Evne, to build that Mishkan in our hearts, in our homes, with our families. It's a time to coalesce around ourselves, our closest, most innermost circle. I'll just end with this. I saw someone forward it to me, a ridiculous amount of things being forwarded to me, and it's hard to keep up. But Julia Roberts, pretty woman, Julia Roberts. So she reposted a poem from some poet who was writing how we need to utilize this time that we are being somewhat sequestered, somewhat quarantined, not as a restrictive time, but rather as an opportunity to introspect, to connect, and to see the holiness and the opportunity in that. What example did this poet use as a time of restrictions being liberating as opposed to restrictive? The Jewish Shabbat. That's the example that this secular, I don't know, Jewish or not, poet used. That for the Jews, Shabbat, with all of its restrictions, does not restrict, but it liberates. It liberates us from our electronic pinging that's nonstop. It liberates us from all of that and allows us to use this time to, she didn't say this, but I'll say, to build that Bilvavi Mishkan Evne. Everybody should stay healthy. Everybody should stay safe. Everybody should listen to the instructions of the CDC, including myself, Natalie, I know. Points anybody else wants to bring up before we sign off?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Great having everybody on board. And thank you, Margot. I will send to Natalie. Thank you. And
Good to see you.
and who knows? Every situation creates new opportunities. And you're welcome, Karen. And this, perhaps this might be a way that we'll move forward in addition to having classes in person, to also allow this for people at all times. This might open up. Who knows? We have to roll with the punches and then see how we could gain from it, what we can learn from it, and how we can be better going forward. Okay. For the kids, what do you mean, Karen?
For our little ones, there's no Hebrew school. There's no. So I was just thinking maybe this would be a good way.
Yes, I'll find. Someone sent me an email or a WhatsApp. I have to find what it is, of a whole host of things being hosted on the internet for the kids that anyone can log into. So if you Karen, send myself or Natalie an email, and I'll try to find that and send that back to you. Okay? But you're making an excellent point.
Thank you.
Okay, my friends. A good day, everybody.
Goodbye, you too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye, everybody.